Hi everyone, welcome to our web talk today, and thank you for joining us. So my name is Doris Wu, and I'm a research associate with A Path for Europe, which is a recently formed think tank focusing on the future of the European Union. So our team is exclusively of young individuals, comprising of young researchers, PhD students, master's students, and young professionals, and we hope to conduct research and develop policy advice in order to foster engagement through debates and through talks, as this one we have today. So this web talk is part of our event series called Coffee Conversations COVID-19, and we want to explore the impact of COVID-19 on a variety of EU policy areas. So through several web talks, we'll be discussing with experts their current thoughts and advice on the current policy challenges that we're facing and how to navigate them. So today we're going to talk about how the COVID-19 crisis is affecting environmental policy. And here with us today is Professor Pamela Chasek. She is the Professor of Political Science at Manhattan College in the US, and she is also the co-founder and executive editor of the Earth Negotiations Bulletin, which provides daily coverage on UN environment and sustainable development negotiations. So if you have any questions during this talk, feel free to type them into the text box, and then we will have a short Q&A section at the end. So with that, I would like to welcome and thank Professor Chasek for joining us today.
Thank you.
So I guess to start things off, we've seen that with the current pandemic, there's been a lot of actually decrease in air and water pollution, particularly among hard-hit areas with stricter lockdown policies, and also as people start commuting, stop commuting and start working from home. So do you think that we will actually see sustained behavioral changes and attitudes towards working culture, as well as consumption and travel for work and travel for pleasure from the government and from people in their personal lives? Or do you think we'll see that as people try to reboot the economy, that restrictions will be lifted, and then we'll see actually a resurgence of emissions after the recession?
Well, most experts right now are, I would not say optimistic. However, the question is really, what is this new normal going to be? We've seen a decrease in carbon dioxide emissions. We've seen a decrease in other emissions that are usually caused by manufacturing, by travel, both land and air travel. We've seen a decrease in some cases in some areas of water pollution, once again linked to travel and transoceanic travel of container ships and cruise ships and manufacturing that tends to sometimes pollute waterways. But as the economy gets going, the real question is, are we going to build back better, or are we going to just try to resume normal activity? In some areas, I don't think we're going to be able to resume normal activity for quite some time. And even though some governments, notably my own, want us to get the economy going immediately, that a lot of people are not quite ready for it. But I think we'll see some changes, perhaps for the better. One of which is, I think people have now realized that a lot of their work can be done like this, through a Zoom chat. It's not the same as being in the same place, unfortunately, but there are some things you can do this way. I didn't have to get on a plane and travel to Berlin to do this with you today. I didn't have to get in a plane and go to Stockholm for a meeting I did last week at the Stockholm Environment Institute. So those sort of things are possible. And I think for business travel is something that really sustains the travel agency, even more so than holiday travel. And I think we're going to see a decrease in business travel because a lot of businesses have realized that a lot of their small meetings can be done this way. It doesn't require someone to hop in a plane in Chicago in the morning to fly to New York to have a meeting with a client and then fly back to Chicago at the end of that day. So I think we're going to see some changes like that. I think we're also going to see more companies being more comfortable with telecommuting and not making their employees come into the office every day. But the real things that we need to be able to keep these behavioral changes are really investments in not just restarting everything same old, but starting things in a cleaner way. The decreases we've seen in CO2 emissions are helpful, but are not going to be enough to keep us to the 2 degrees Celsius, or even forget the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise that governments have committed to. It's still not enough, even with we've seen shutting down most of the world's economies.
Yeah, that's also kind of the concern, I think, yeah, with a lot of people is how, how it will kind of bounce back with the economy, whether we will try to maintain the lower emissions. And I think the pandemic has shown that it is possible to slow down some aspects of life in a reasonable way, like you mentioned, like telecommuting and working from home and not having to fly across the country for like an hour-long business meeting, but it could just really be done, over Zoom. And that takes us then to our next point is, in order to restart the economy, there's some stimulus packages that some leaders have been proposing, such as green stimulus packages. And these have been on the forefront of the European Union's agenda. Most importantly is the European Green Deal, which aims to make the EU's economy more sustainable and climate neutral. But currently during the pandemic, a lot of this legislation has now been delayed, with some political leaders saying that recovering the economy and protecting jobs should come first. But is there a way that we can combine these packages with funds that are already established to rescue the economy, for example, by granting more aids and incentives towards greener industries? And how can we kind of convince the carbon emission industries that emit a lot to like kind of, how can we transition this smoothly?
Well, most of the focus has clearly been on how do we get people back to work? How do we ensure people are not going to lose their homes, they're going to have enough to eat? What are we going to do about school? What are we going to do about, some of the basics that people need, not to mention health and ensuring that there's sufficient money for healthcare and for testing and for contact tracing, and all of these different things clearly are coming first. The problem is a lot of people are not making that link between the environment and public health, and the environment and economic growth. And so, and a lot of politicians who are those, and lawmakers who would need to do this, are not necessarily seeing that big picture, that there is a clear link between biodiversity loss, between wildlife trafficking, with challenges to public health. Why are new diseases coming out? Most of the ones that we've seen recently are actually what are known as zoonotic diseases, which originate with animals. And so what is it that we've done to our planet, to our, to ecosystems and to our biodiversity that has led to an increase in these zoonotic diseases? So, but most lawmakers don't see that. And so that, and I know, I can't say for Europe, but I know definitely here, some of the Democrats in the House of Representatives were trying to put in some conditionality into the COVID-19 response legislation, so that that would deal with renewable energies, for example, and that money would be available to certain industries if they would also be using it for transitioning to renewable energies. And a number of the Republicans said, claimed, oh no, the Democrats are holding this important legislation up that's going to provide money to all of you people who need it, because they're trying to make this an environmental issue. And as long as you have this sort of thing that if you care for the environment, it's bad for the economy. I'll talk more about that later. But or if you care for the environment, it's taking away from public health, and not recognizing that they're all interlinked and they're all one package. And so I don't think we're going to see as much of it as we should, largely because it's being viewed as almost a partisan issue.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has really shown how difficult it is now to separate what should be purely science or political issues and what's a partisan issue. And I think this is something that's very clear right now in the US, maybe compared to other countries, which is kind of a shame.
It is, and it's one of the things that's sort of particularly worrisome was this, and I didn't watch the full ad, but this morning I had the television on and an ad came on touting the importance of science. And I don't know who it was done because I had to get on an earlier meeting, so I left it. I never saw whose ad it was. But the fact that we have to have ads on television to tout the importance of science, and it just shows this long-term, at least in the United States, and once again, I cannot speak for Europe, but where we have had this this reluctance to listen to science. And we've seen this playbook for years. We saw the same playbook that's being used right now with COVID-19 is used with climate change, was used by the tobacco industry beforehand to play down the risks of cigarette smoking to your health. It's all the same playbook, that you attack the science, you don't listen to it. Oh, the science is wrong, the science is partisan. You don't want scientists telling you what to do. It's doing away with your freedom. And we're seeing it again with COVID-19. And the same people are the same people who also are denying climate change.
Yeah, this is definitely being clear. I wonder, do you think that it just has to do with the education that has been given, or that people are kind of in their media bubbles, or?
I think all of the above. I think we've seen a decrease in good science education, in the United States at least. I think we've seen the media bubbles are a huge part of it. But what's underlying it is that, you know, key people are seeing the reliance on science as something that may not be good for their future economic well-being, perhaps their personal wealth. And so oil industry executives, coal executives, some of the automobile executives who've all been very supportive of those who believe we should not have climate change legislation because it directly impacts their bottom line. You've also, with regard to COVID-19, this fact of, oh, you know, don't worry about it, it's a hoax. Yet, a lot of people have, I think I saw something like, you know, in the high 80s, and 90% of respondees to a recent survey across the United States said they would not, if movie theaters and nail salons and restaurants and barbershops and other places were reopened, they wouldn't go. So, you know, maybe science may be winning here. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you can kind of connect these opposing thoughts, right? It's also like when you see the marches in the US and people are calling it a hoax, but then you also see people wearing masks at the marches.
Right.
But speaking about when you were saying that the science kind of goes against people's own personal gain, especially with economic gain, and we see that, yeah, with the oil industry or with automotive industry. So in March, the Environmental Protection Agency under the Trump administration actually temporarily relaxed the enforcement of the environmental regulation for air and water. So that way any fines during the COVID-19 pandemic would not be given. kind of as a way to, I guess, help them, not struggle as much during the pandemic. So to combat this, the Sierra Club actually then recently announced that they want to start a watchdog polluter program to kind of still attempt to hold these industries that are polluting accountable. So how do you think this will affect green legislation in the future in the US? Do you think that they can be successful in actually holding some of these industries accountable? And are there any positive actions in the US actually that are moving towards green initiatives?
Right now, with the current political system, nothing's going to happen at the federal level. We can talk about state and local in a minute, but that the only way we are going to see a change at the federal level, and even then it's going to be difficult because of how partisan this has become, is if the Democrats are able to take the White House, hold on to the House of Representatives, and take over the Senate. Now, but everything could be derailed, unfortunately, depending on the state of the economy and the state of COVID-19. And I still don't know if we will have the leadership to be able to link them all together and ensure that green initiatives come into play. Now, the Trump administration, long before COVID-19, has been rolling back a lot of enforcement capabilities at the EPA and elsewhere in U.S. government, and ignoring certain things that they're required to do by law, rolling back some of the executive orders from the Obama administration, because the Obama administration could not get things through Congress. So President Obama relied on what are called executive orders, which can easily be rescinded by the next president. Similarly, the executive orders that President Trump has issued can be rescinded by the next president. So it's until Congress is actually able to work together on these issues, at the federal level, we're not going to see much. We've seen a lot more pre-COVID-19 at the state and local levels, particularly with regard to green buildings, with regard to running public transportation on, not using diesel or being changing, putting in tax incentives for people to, better insulate or switch to solar power or other issues at the state and local levels. Cities in particular have been really on the front ends with this, and I think we've seen a lot of progress on, not just with climate change, but on a lot of green initiatives in cities. The problem, though, we're going to see is because of the decline in the economy, and the fact that states have been spending a state like New York has been spending so much money dealing with COVID-19. And at the same time, because, tourist revenue is not coming in, because Broadway has been closed for 2 months, because of other moneymaker things in the state is collecting much less in tax revenue, as is the city. So New York City has already announced that they're going to suspend the composting program. We have compost pickup in New York City, and that they're suspending it. Now, a number of environmental groups are protesting that. The mayor's argument is, we just don't have the money for it anymore. The other issue is because of waste streams have switched. So now there's a lot more household waste and not as much business waste. So in a place like New York, where you have different trash haulers, I don't want to go into the trash of New York, it's a long story, but you have different trash haulers responsible for different clients. And so the city picks up household waste, and suddenly they have twice as much household waste to pick up. And those who are hired to deal with industrial and business waste have nothing. And so it's a whole change of how things are done, and it's ending up costing the city more because the city covers household waste. So it's I think we're going to see a challenge, once again, unless they're able to link these all together effectively and sell it. We're going to see a challenge even in the areas where the cities and states have been far ahead of the federal government.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see during this pandemic what is prioritized and what is not. And it's always interesting to see how stuff related to environment and mental health are always cut first or rolled back first, which is interesting because you're right, it's all linked. You could do a lot of job creation in this area, and there's a lot of definitely creative thinking that can go on. But yeah, somehow it's this huge disconnect that's probably mainly driven by money. But not to get too dark. So you've been running the Earth Negotiation Bulletin since 1982, so for almost 3 decades now. And I was just wondering, in the last almost 30 years, have you seen any positive changes that have occurred, or any surprising environmental policy changes or grassroots movements that have been successfully implemented?
Yeah, it's a hard time to be positive. In fact, as an aside, I've been trying every day. I get out every morning to either go for a walk or go for a run, and I've been posting now for 53 days the positive photo of the day, which is a nature photo for all but one day, and trying to stay positive. I'm working on a book right now that I'm feeling is getting increasingly dark with each revision that I do. And so how to stay positive, and this is interesting for those of us who teach environmental politics, environmental policy. It's a constant thing. How do we keep our classes from being so depressing? What can we do? So trying to find those little success stories is sometimes very difficult. So a couple of the ones that I've seen is, one is a procedural one, is that a lot of environmental negotiations have now been opened up to an unprecedented number of people, people from, indigenous communities, from youth, in some cases children, the disabled, lots of different interest groups that have not always been involved and are now able to attend meetings or follow them online. A lot of them, at least the formal meetings, have been webcast for a couple of years now, and that increases transparency, and the Earth Negotiations Bulletin was designed to increase transparency. Now, not every meeting is broadcast. The closed meetings, where the real stuff happens, you cannot watch remotely, and a lot of people at the meetings cannot get into, but that, but you can see governments taking into consideration a broader set of interests due to the fact that this has been opened up. One of the great examples of this in recent years is one everyone knows, is the Fridays for Future movement and the rise of youth climate activists, which has been very, very clear. It doesn't mean that governments are going to do what they want, unfortunately, but what it means is their voices are being heard, and they've had a huge impact. And so I think that we need youth activists. We need youth to really take on the future in more than just protesting, but to really do that out-of-the-box thinking and be able to present things in language that policymakers can understand to take it to the next level. I think we've also seen positive action on ozone-depleting chemicals and the rescuing of the ozone layer. Everyone says that's the biggest success story because it is. And the Kigali Amendment that was adopted a couple of years ago, which bans hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which are actually potent greenhouse gases. And so by doing that under the Montreal Protocol, it's going to have a huge impact on climate change as these chemicals are phased down that are largely used in refrigeration, air conditioners, and such. We saw it happen with, with CFCs initially when they were banned by the Montreal Protocol or phased out, they people, oh my God, what are we going to do? Even the U.S. was ahead of the game on that, and I remember people saying, "Oh, we're all going to smell because we cannot use spray-on deodorant that use CFCs." But you know what? We still use it, and it just doesn't have CFCs. We have the ability to come up with alternatives, and the ozone regime shows us that is possible. Action on plastic pollution and the rise of concern about plastic pollution has been really, really important, and is now being dealt with under the Basel Convention, and others are addressing it. However, the biggest thing I've seen here, and I don't know if you've seen it in Europe as well, is we have a whole new type of pollution, is latex gloves and face masks that people are just dropping everywhere. On Earth Day, I took half an hour to clean up part of my neighborhood, and the bag that I brought a pretty large trash bag, and it was full within 15 minutes. And we're seeing unfortunately, we're stepping back. A lot of cities had single-use plastic bag bans. Those have now been put on hold because they're figuring that they're safer than people bringing their own bags into grocery stores. Things like bringing, Starbucks was one of the first to say that we could not bring our own cups into Starbucks because of fear of COVID-19. So all those gains we've made in the last 2 years on plastic pollution, I fear are coming back, but for a while it was really positive. I think we've seen in terms of grassroots and other groups, the importance of the small island developing states really have pushed the climate agenda because their future is at stake, and it shows that you don't have to be a big and powerful country to be able to push an agenda forward. And I think that goes for different activists as well, to be able to, you don't have to be a powerful country. You can still make a difference, and that is really important. And did I have another example? And I also think the growth of renewables and the fact that the prices of renewables have gone down, and this has enabled people in the poorest parts of the world to be able to get access to small-scale solar and other forms of renewable energies, places where they were spending, 60% or more of their income on kerosene to be able to cook and light their homes, are now not having to spend that money. That reduces indoor air pollution, that improves public health, and that enables them to spend their money on other necessities of life and not just on kerosene. So I think, that's been a real positive, and hopefully that will continue. I'm a little concerned now because the price of oil is so low, and when the price of oil is low, you tend to see less movement in the area of renewables. And so I'm hoping in this case, we'll still see positive movement. I saw a statistic yesterday for the automobile industry and how car sales have just plummeted, except in one area, and that's electric vehicles. So there may be hope.
Yeah, I saw that as well, and also I think in China that it's maybe becoming more popular as well, electric vehicles, which would be great because there's so much issue with the air quality there. Going back to what we talked about earlier about this being such a strong bipartisan topic, despite that it should really just be about public health and about people's health and livelihoods. What are some things that you could maybe recommend for people who want to talk across party lines, how to have more rational conversations? For me, when I watch the media in the US, it's very difficult because I would have to say that from both sides, they're not really making the conversation easy. That they are just attacking each other or saying something negative about the other person. So how can we kind of return to a more mature conversation that's just about solving the problems and not making it about politics or re-election or money.
Right. Well, I think one thing that has to be done is to provide lawmakers some political cover so that they are going to feel safe. So having, one thing that has been used in the past, has been used internationally, could also be used domestically, I think, is to be able to create some retreat-like atmospheres where there can be guided discussions that use Chatham House rules, so nobody, media is excluded. So you can actually do some collaborative problem solving, and be able to maybe come up with some proposals that you can sell to your political allies, to be able to put things through that is not necessarily going to have individual votes, so people will not be able to be criticized by name for having supported something. And so, how do you provide them with the political cover they need to be able to make those choices that the rest of us need and that would benefit the rest of us? And so that's going to be a big challenge, especially because of lobbying money and the role of lobbyists in government and such. But I think if there's some way that you can create the space for those conversations across party lines, to say that it's not just, we don't want to just put in this environmental piece of a COVID-19 legislation just because that's who we are. No, we want to put in this environmental piece into it because one of the things we've noticed is that people who have, pre-existing conditions are the ones who are getting harmed most by COVID-19. And who has the pre-existing conditions? People who live in these types of environments. And, can we put things in that will help alleviate those pre-existing conditions and have an environmental benefit at the same time? Trying to tie it in with that. And I would use the asthma issue, except there's some question right now, because people with asthma, as a person with asthma, I've been reading and following a lot of this, have not been as disproportionately affected by COVID-19, but the neighborhoods that are most affected around the US and probably in Europe too are the poorer neighborhoods. And in those poorer neighborhoods is where you tend to have industry. It's where you tend to have lack of fresh food. It's where you tend to have trucks and buses that are idling and contributing to air pollution. And so all of that together creates less healthy people, who are the people who are being disproportionately affected by this disease.
Yeah, I think there's a very strong socioeconomic divide with, the treatment you're able to get, the resources that you have. Also, a lot of these people living in these areas are also the necessary workers as well. They're the ones that are still running the country. And so I think it's very interesting to see then how then elections will go in the US. Not to make this all about America, this talk, but I'm very curious to see how countries will recognize how environment is really such a global problem, and not just because we are losing biodiversity, but how it actually is affecting people's health and livelihoods, and how there is this strong divide between who can.
Right, and Europe has generally been, at least on the international level, far ahead of the US in promoting a lot of these issues. But then the concern is, with the current state of the European Union, are these environmental regulations, particularly CO2 emission reductions, going to actually be able to continue as you're seeing a left-right divide within the European Union as well? And so that's another issue. And, I'm not a Europe expert by any means, but looking at, what is the future of the European Union, and what is the future of European environmental regulations? and they're being able to take the lead at the international level, not just in policy proposals, but also in funding for developing countries to implement a lot of those environmental proposals. And that's worrisome for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's definitely, yeah, being able to help other countries as well as probably not taking the priority right now as countries are trying to recover their own economies. But hopefully we can see in the next year that maybe people come up with some creative solutions where they can maybe work together. Because we've also seen during the pandemic that people, even though there's a lot of separation, that people are helping their neighbors out and
right. And I think, you know, as people are starting to really have to think outside of the box of how quote unquote business as usual is going to continue, and how much can be postponed, how much really wasn't important anyway, versus what needs to happen. And you know, one of the concerns is that, you know, natural disasters are going to keep on happening regardless of COVID-19. Are we still going to be able to respond to cyclones and earthquakes and, you know, major rain events and other things that are still going to keep happening? People are still going to be suffering from drought. Land degradation is going to continue happening. You know, there's locusts are going to continue coming. You know, all of these things are going to continue, and you know, we've almost been exclusively focusing on COVID-19 for at least 2 months now. And yes, I know other people are working on other things, but those things are going to happen, and those things are going to need money, and they're going to need attention, and they're going to need policy shifts. So I'm not, you know, sure, you know, how we're going to be able to go forward. I mean, we will somehow, but something's going to give, and I'm not sure what that's going to be. And sadly, based on experience, it's often the environment.
Yeah, I think right now everybody's kind of looking to see how the countries that are recovering as well, how they're dealing with it. So I'm very curious to see. Germany is starting to open up. China's been trying to get back to normal, and then really seeing how. I think it's a good opportunity for these countries to kind of set a precedent on how we should smartly restart the economy.
Right. And then what form is that going to take? And then the issue is, are we going to be able to, it would be really nice to be able to do something to put all of these workers whose jobs will not be returning to work doing something positive for the environment. It was done before as part of the New Deal by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States, by creating the Civilian Conservation Corps, for example, and doing a number of other infrastructure projects that helped people come back to work. So here we're going to have a lot of people, sadly, whose jobs will not return because the small businesses that they worked for will not return, or even the large businesses they worked for are not going to be back for quite some time. And so, you know, can we think of positive ways of how to help people work in a safe manner, in a healthy manner, but maybe one that's also beneficial to the environment as a whole. But currently, you know, a lot of countries don't have that leadership to make that happen. Some do, and I think some of them will start to see, but definitely not here.
Yeah, hopefully the 2020 goes better with the elections. So I would like to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any, now is the time to ask, and you can type it into the chat box. Otherwise, I have so many questions still.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the
Um,
Zoom one, but maybe elsewhere.
So I guess I will just continue with some questions. So I was wondering, I think in terms of Europe, with the leadership, I think Germany is probably poised really well as one of the countries that have mitigated the coronavirus very well. And what do you think that they can do in terms of negotiations with the other countries to try to kind of get them on board? With focusing on environmental questions, because I think they're going to try to restart putting money towards more green industries.
Right, and I think Europe is going to, the big green leaders in Europe are going to be focused on that, particularly even though the climate change COP is being postponed till 2021, it's going to be in the UK. Prep meetings are going to be held in Italy. So it's going to be very Europe focused, and Europe, the EU and the UK know that they have to take the lead for this conference to be a success. They don't want a failure. And going all the way back to Copenhagen, that nobody's wanted that to happen again. And that's why you saw the French being very proactive when they had the presidency, which led to the Paris Agreement. And I think what we're going to see now that it's the COP rotates regionally, and now that it's coming back to Europe, the onus of responsibility is going to be on Europe. Even though the UK has left the European Union, it doesn't matter. Europe still has to take the lead. So I think we're going to see it. Oh wait, there's a Q&A.
Oh yeah, now I see it.
Okay. I see it too. Let me get there. Okay, so let me just go. Should I just go through some of these?
We could. I think this one goes with what you were just talking about, which is the EU. Can the EU be a role model?
Yeah, and I think so. Now, from a U.S. perspective, it's sort of. I mean, from my perspective, absolutely. There are parts of the U.S. government that don't want to listen to anybody because they see themselves as the role model. But I think particularly on a number of issues that Europe is taking the lead, and a lot of what Europe is doing should be seen as a role model for the rest of the world. We'll have to see if that all continues. But the other big event that's coming up is the 50th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, which will be in 2022. And the Swedes are already working on this. So you have a leadership from the Swedes leading up to that meeting. And that was the meeting that created the UN Environment Program. So there's also going to be a lot of commemoration of 50 years of UNEP and going forward. And so I think in both cases, you're going to see a lot of leadership out of the EU.
Following on that, do you think then China might take a lead also on protecting the nature post-COVID-19?
China's an interesting case. And, if China wants to be a world leader, it has to start taking the lead on a number of issues. And I think the biggest one that China needs to address is the illegal wildlife trade when it comes to the environment. I'm not going to deal with all the other issues that China has to address. But, China and Asia are some of the biggest, and East Asia are some of the biggest areas that are generating this illegal wildlife trade. And to be able to deal with that, you need China to be very, very proactive. The other issue is obviously with greenhouse gas emissions, as China is the largest emitter, though not the largest per capita emitter. That's still the US. That needs to be addressed. Air pollution issues in China need to be addressed. And that if China can actually do everything that it needs to do environmentally, it could become a leader. But right now, people don't have that trust in China to actually do it. So if China wants to be a leader, China has to demonstrate leadership and start providing sort of best practices on environmental issues.
think that could be said a lot about a lot of different leaders.
Yes, yes.
So just one more question to wrap things up. So do you think the EU Circular Economy Action Plan can be actually implemented given the continuous postponement of its strategies due to the pandemic?
I don't know a lot about that, to be perfectly honest. I know who I would ask if I wasn't on a live recording. I know who I'd immediately text who knows a lot about that particular issue. But my guess is, like a lot of things, we're going to keep seeing it postponed, and people are going to argue, no, we've got to get people back to work. We've got to come up with a vaccine. We've got to find a way to overcome this current, this pandemic and its economic implications before we move forward. And I think that, like many other issues, if you're able to integrate it into the response, it will move forward. Otherwise, I feel like so much it's going to be put on the back burner until people have the personal bandwidth to deal with it again. But I think it has to be, you know, part of this response rather than separate. I just don't know if people can do that.
Yeah, I hope that there's a way that we can, you know, put these conversations more together. Is there any kind of last, I don't know, advice or recommendation you want to make for our viewers?
Well, I think the most important thing is if these are issues that you care about, you also have to do it in your, you know, you've got to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And going out and protesting is one thing, but actually, how can you take it to the next level? How can you really not only ensure that you're heard by your policymakers, but that you have concrete proposals that you can try to sell them, whether it's something on a small level, household level, you know, try dealing with it in your own home. You know, how can we reduce waste? How can we, you know, I had a project that didn't happen this year, but the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah is where a small amount of oil lasted for 8 days. So I said, what if you have only, you know, one trash bag for 8 days? And what if you really rethink, you know, focus on recycling doesn't count. You can still do your recycling. Composting doesn't count. You can do your composting. But what if you tried to reduce your trash output to a certain amount? What if you were to limit if you have a car, how much you drive? What if you were to self-ration that? What if you were to ration how many times you get on an airplane once air travel resumes? Do you have an option for mass transit? Do you have an option to walk or cycle? Lobbying for more cycling streets so that more people will cycle to commute rather than have to drive. You know, lobbying your place of work. Can you put in a shower for cyclists? Can you put in a storage area for bicycles so they're not outside? You know, all sorts of things that you can do on a small level, as well as lobbying your governments and your leaders to do things at the national level. But I think it needs to, you know, what good is it? You know, you see how much criticism someone comes in when they fly in, you know, to a state capital to lobby and fly home that day, and you're saying, you know, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, you know, you just created how many by taking this flight to come here? What other ways can you do it? And I think now that many more people are becoming maybe more comfortable with these sorts of forums, doing things electronically, you know, being able to maybe, you know, invite political leaders to come to classes, to come to little small forums where they can talk directly with concerned citizens about these issues might be an interesting way to go as well.
I think it's a good point also to start looking at your own life and how you can implement changes and then how to bring that up into more.
Right.
actionable
Exactly.
government.
Right.
Yeah, but thank you for this really interesting talk. It was really cool to hear about all the different things that have changed in the past as well, and then hopefully we can use this now to apply to the future and how we deal with the post-COVID-19 world. Yeah, but thank you very much, and also thank you everyone else for coming. Tomorrow we will have another web talk with Wolfgang Sporer at 2 p.m. You can register on our website at Path for Europe. Thank you again, Pam, and hope you have a nice week.
Thank you, you too.